Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's live stream and in-person L'chu Neranana service in which we spiritually connect. We seek a service of spiritual seeking. Today's L'chu Neranana program is Iyun Tfilah, a deep dive into one of the prayers in our service, designed for learners of all experiences and backgrounds. This morning we're going to be looking at the Musaf service. But before we begin that, I thought we'd start with some music to set the mood. So please sing with me. Ozi Vezimrat ya Vayili Lishua 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 Ozi Vezimrat ya Vayili Lishua. Well, Shabbat Shalom. My name is Rabbi Rafi Spitzer. I hope that you're joining. This is our L'chu Neranana Iyun Tfilah learner service. We're going to be looking today at the Musaf service, which you can follow along in your Siddur on page 432. First of all, what is Musaf? Musaf literally means additional service. And so the Musaf service is the service which corresponds to the special additional sacrifice. There was a sacrifice in the temple that was the daily sacrifice. That corresponds to our morning service. We have the morning service every day. And there was an afternoon sacrifice in the temple, which corresponds to our afternoon service. And there was an evening sacrifice, which corresponds to our evening service. But on holidays and Shabbat, there was a fourth sacrifice, a special sacrifice for that day. And that is what we replaced after the destruction of the temple with the Musaf, or additional service. It refers to the additional sacrifice that is special for Shabbat, or for Yom Tov, for the holiday, or for Rosh Chodesh, for the new moon, for the new month. That's, by the way, why later holidays like Hanukkah and Purim don't have or Yom Ha'atzmaut, which we celebrated this year, don't have a Musaf service attached to them. They don't have a Musaf service because the Musaf refers to the sacrifice, so it only applies to the biblical holidays where the Bible, where the 5 books of Moses prescribe an extra sacrifice. Hanukkah and Purim and Yom Ha'atzmaut are holidays that are instituted after the biblical period and therefore don't have a required additional sacrifice. Well, let's take a step back for a moment and talk about what makes a service a service. So every day we have 3 services. Shacharit, the morning service, Mincha, the afternoon service, and Ma'ariv, the evening service. You might ask, well, what about the Torah service? Well, it's a good question. We do have a Torah service 4 times a week on Saturday afternoons, Monday mornings, Thursday mornings, and Saturday mornings. Those are the times that we have a Torah service. But actually, technically, even though it's not actually its own service, it is simply a part of the Shacharit service, part of the morning service. What makes a service its own unique service in Judaism is the presence of an Amidah, the presence of a standing prayer. So, on a regular weekday, we have 3 standing prayers, 3 Amidot, 1 at Shacharit, 1 at Mincha, and 1 at Mariv. On Shabbat, festivals, Rosh Chodesh, we have an additional standing prayer. That is the Musaf Amidah, the Musaf prayer, the additional prayer. And we usually do the Musaf prayer immediately following Shacharit. But the truth is that the Musaf service has no prescribed time. You can do the Musaf service at any time over the course of the Shabbat day, not the evening before. We do have one day of the year where it's customary for us to have 5 Amidot, 5 different services, and that is Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we have the evening service, we have the Shacharit service, the morning service, we have the Musaf service, or the additional service, we have the Mincha service, or the afternoon service, and we have the Ne'ilah, or the closing of the gates service, which has its own Amidah, which has its own standing prayer. Now, on Yom Kippur, we also have a couple of other things. We have something that we call the Avodah service, or the Avodah service. That's actually not technically its own service. It's just part of the Musaf. And there are times where we might call Psukei de Zimra, the verses of song that we do at the beginning of our Shacharit service, we might call that the Psukei de Zimra service. But in fact, Psukei de Zimra is, you can either think of it as part of Shacharit, as part of the morning service, or you can think of it as entirely a warm-up for prayer. It's not really a service at all. It's just some psalms and prayers that we do in order to get ourselves in the mood for prayer. Now, this is our 4th Iyun Tfilah, our 4th learner service of this year, and we've been working our way through the parts of the service. So we started with Psukei de Zimra, we started with the verses of praise, and that week we looked deeply at Psalm 30, which we say right before Baruch She'amar, right before the beginning of the Psukei de Zimra service, which is not really a service, but the Psukei de Zimra part of our service. And we took a deep dive into that psalm. On the 2nd Iyun Tfilah learners service of this year, we looked at the Shacharit, we looked at the part of the Shacharit service that had to do with the Shema and its blessings. And we looked at the themes of the Shema and its blessings throughout through that morning. That is to say, the first blessing before the Shema has the theme of creation, the second blessing before the Shema has the theme of revelation, and the third blessing immediately following the Shema has the theme of redemption. So we talked about the blessings surrounding the Shema. On our third time, we talked about the Amidah, the standing prayer, the pinnacle of Jewish prayer, the Everest of Jewish prayer. That's the most important spiritual moment in the Shacharit service, in the morning service on Shabbat morning, which is the Amidah, the standing prayer, and we talked about the themes in the Amidah as they connect to Shabbat. So we talked about how on Shabbat evening we connect the Amidah to creation, to Shabbat as being about the creation of the world. On Shabbat morning, we connect the concept of Shabbat to revelation, to the fact that Shabbat is commanded in the Torah and is one of the 10 commandments, and the fact that we read Torah on Shabbat morning. And then at Shabbat Mincha, the third service on Shabbat, we connect Shabbat to being a taste of the world to come, Me'ein Olam Haba, and we think about the possibility of redemption. So we showed how creation, revelation, and redemption occurs both in the Shema blessings and in the Amidah. Today we're looking at Musaf. And what I'd like to do is do kind of a comparative translation, paragraph by paragraph in the Musaf, from 4 different Sidurim. The 4 different Sidurim, I have the Koren Sidur with the commentary by the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of Great Britain. The Koren Sidur is an Orthodox Sidur. The translation is an Orthodox translation, whatever that means. I have Sidur Sim Shalom, the one that we've been using since COVID started, which is the Jules Harlow edition from the full edition from 1985. I have the Sidur Sim Shalom Slim Shalom edition, which is from 1998. And I have the newest version of the conservative Sidur, the Sidur Lev Shalem, which came out very recently in 2016. And we're going to look at each of these translations. By the way, just for the sake of comparison, the Koren Sidur with the commentary by Jonathan Sachs came out also not so long ago in 2009. So we'll start with the Sidur that I'm sure you'll have at home. We're on page 435. We're going to do it paragraph by paragraph, thinking about what the themes are of the Musaf service and what the words mean. Tikanta Shabbat Ratzita Korbanotecha. Shabbat you have established, Lord our God, prescribing by your will its special offerings and sacrifices. Those who delight in Shabbat will inherit enduring glory. Those who savor Shabbat share the bliss of eternal life. Those who love its teachings have chosen greatness. At Sinai did our ancestors receive the mitzvah of Shabbat, and you commanded them that on Shabbat an additional sacrifice be offered. So compare that to the Slim Shalom version. You have established Shabbat Adonai our God, prescribing by your will its special offerings and sacrifices. That's very similar. Those who delight in Shabbat will inherit enduring glory. That's the same. Those who savor Shabbat will share the bliss of eternal life. Those who love its teachings have chosen greatness. That's the same too. At Sinai, our ancestors received the mitzvah of Shabbat, and you commanded them that on Shabbat, and you commanded them that they offer an additional sacrifice on Shabbat. So there the change is just grammatical. Instead of passive voice, you commanded them that on Shabbat an additional sacrifice be offered, that you commanded them that they offer an additional sacrifice on Shabbat. Easier to read. Now I'm going to read that same paragraph in the Orthodox Siddur. You instituted the Shabbat, you favored its offerings, you commanded its specific laws, along with the order of its libations. Those who delight in it inherit eternal glory. That's the same, though you'll notice that while the words libations do appear in the Hebrew in the conservative Siddur, it is not translated in the Harlo. Those who relish it merit life, and those who love its teachings have chosen greatness. All of that is very similar. Even before Sinai, they were commanded about it. I think that's a much better translation. Az misinai. Az misinai. Even before Sinai, they were commanded about Shabbat, which is true if you read through the book of Exodus. In fact, Shabbat is commanded even before the Torah was given. It's interesting that Harlo doesn't translate it that way, but that Harlo translated it, at Sinai did our ancestors receive the mitzvah of Shabbat. I think even before is a better translation. Even before Sinai, they were commanded about it. Then you, Lord our God, commanded us to offer the additional offering of the Shabbat in the appropriate way, in the proper way, which this doesn't say in the proper way, even though in the English it does, in the Hebrew it does say that. Korban mitzvat musaf Shabbat kara'ui. Appropriate. Be offered in the appropriate way. So now the most recent conservative translation. You established Shabbat and desired its offerings. You prescribed the details of its service and the order of the libations. So you'll notice that the libations are, in fact, translated in the Lev Shalem. Harlo, anytime there was something sort of uncomfortable in the Hebrew, the Harlo translation simply leaves it out. It stays in the Hebrew, but it's left out of the English, as if to say, well, we know that the people in the conservative pews don't know Hebrew anyway, so if we don't translate it, they won't know that they're saying it. The authors of the Lev Shalem Siddur said, we trust the people in our congregations. We should translate the Hebrew as faithfully as we can. So the libations are back in the English. Those who savor Shabbat truly merit life. Those who love its teachings have chosen to join in its greatness. Adonai, our God, it was at Sinai you commanded its observance and commanded our ancestors to offer additional appropriate sacrifice on Shabbat. So Musaf Shabbat Kara'ui is translated as appropriate or proper in the fourth bracha. In the Lev Shalem. Interestingly, they also chose to translate Az Misinai as it was at Sinai, as opposed to before Sinai. So I think you could probably understand those words either way. Az can mean since or from then. It can also mean before. So honestly, I think it's a very good translation, the Lev Shalem translation. So that's the first paragraph. So the theme there is, this is our Musaf service, which symbolizes the additional sacrifice that you commanded, and that you, God, commanded, and it's connected to this idea of savoring Shabbat. That it's extra special on Shabbat, that we get to have an extra sacrifice, an extra way of savoring Shabbat, a special prayer that we do only on Shabbat. Let's go to the next paragraph. May it be your will, we're back on page 435, May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, who restores his children to their land, to lead us in joy to our land and to settle us within our borders. There our ancestors sacrificed to you with their daily offerings and with their special offerings, and there may we worship you with love and reverence, as in days of old and ancient times. And the special offering for Shabbat they offered lovingly according to your will, as it is written in your Torah through Moses your servant, offerings for the day of Shabbat, two yearling lambs without blemish, together with 2/10 of an ephah of choice flour mingled with oil as a grain offering with its proper libation, a burnt offering for every Shabbat, in addition to the daily burnt offering and its libation. Compassionate King, accept with compassion the prayer of your people Israel wherever they dwell. So what is the theme of this paragraph? The theme of this paragraph is returning to the land of Israel, because in the land of Israel is where we can resume offering the Musaf sacrifice once the temple is rebuilt. And it says that our ancestors lovingly offered this sacrifice, and then it gives the verses from the book of Numbers which describe the sacrifice. And it says, there may we worship you with love and reverence as in the days of old. There's a desire to return, in fact, to the temple service and to worship God in the temple again. And then Harlow, in the 1985 edition, added in a line that says, also God, accept our prayers wherever we are. And the truth is that line is totally out of sync with the theme of this paragraph. Because the paragraph is all about the importance of returning to the land. And it's not that the idea of prayer is out of sync with the paragraph, it's the idea of Bechol Mekomot Moshvotehem, that God should accept the prayer in any place that we are. That is a brand new line that Harlow put in. Now notice in the Slim Shalom, that line is removed. May it be your will, Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, who returns your children to their land, to lead us in joy to our land and to settle us within our borders. There our ancestors offered to you their daily and special sacrifices, and the special sacrifice for Shabbat they offered lovingly according to your will, as written in your Torah through Moses your servant, offerings for the day of Shabbat, 2 yearling lambs without blemish, together with 2/10 of an ephah of choice flour, mingled with oil as a grain offering with its proper libation, a burnt offering for every Shabbat, in addition to the daily burnt offering and its libation. So, and it doesn't say anything about the prayers wherever we dwell. So there was a lot of pushback from people about that line, because it completely undercuts the theme of the prayer itself. Now let's look at the Orthodox Sidur's version of this prayer, and we're going to talk a little bit about the grammar and the tenses. So here it says, may it be your will, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, to lead us back in joy to our land and plant us within our borders. There we will prepare for you our obligatory offerings, the regular daily offerings in their order, and the additional offerings according to their laws. And the additional offering of this Sabbath day we will prepare and offer before you in love, in accordance with your will's commandment, as you wrote for us in your Torah through your servant Moses by your own word, as it is said, on the Sabbath day make an offering of 2 lambs a year old without blemish, together with 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil as a meal offering and its appropriate libation. This is the burnt offering for every Shabbat, in addition to the regular daily burnt offering and its libation. So we see that the tense here is in future tense. Bring us back to the land, God, so that we will in the future offer the sacrifice that our ancestors used to offer. Whereas in our in our prayer book, the conservative prayer book changed it all to past tense. So here's how I feel about this. And I know I've said this to you, to some of you before, which is, what bothers me here more than the change of tense is the fact that we take ourselves out of it in our text. So our text says, our ancestors offered these offerings to you. They worshipped you lovingly. They worshipped you according to your will. The Orthodox Siddur, the traditional text, says, we will offer these sacrifices to you. We will offer these sacrifices to you lovingly according to your will. My problem is the difference between they and we. I think it's perfectly legitimate for us to change the text of the Musaf service to talk about what happened in the past. If we don't believe truly that when the temple is rebuilt that there will be a Musaf offering in the future, or if we don't want the temple to be rebuilt, or if we don't want any hint that we're praying for a rebuilt temple on the same spot that the Dome of the Rock currently exists, because we don't want to cause World War III, whatever it is that we don't want, I think it's perfectly legitimate for us to focus instead on the fact that these were historical sacrifices that our ancestors offered. My problem is we should just then say, we offered in the past. We. Because after all, like we say at the Seder night, we consider ourselves as having left Egypt. We consider ourselves as having experienced the wilderness. We consider ourselves as having experienced the revelation of the Torah at Sinai. Right now we're in this moment between Pesach and Shavuot as we're counting up toward revelation from redemption, and we're thinking about the Omer, and each day, another day, toward that redemption, toward that true revelation, toward being able to experience the embrace of God's love through Torah. If we really believe that we were a part of that, then we should say we offered these sacrifices in the past, not they offered these sacrifices in the past. So we'll look at the Lev Shalem translation. May it be your will, Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, who restores their descendants to their land, to lead us there in joy and to plant us in our borders. I do like the word plant, as opposed to settle. To plant us there, there's some sense of being rooted. And that's also a better translation of vititaenu bigulenu, plant us there. Where our ancestors once offered to you their sacrifices, the daily sacrifices in their proper order, as well as the additional sacrifices prescribed for holy days, lovingly, the additional Shabbat sacrifices were offered there as you commanded, fulfilling the words spoken in Revelation and written down by Moses your servant in your Torah. And you'll notice that the emphasis of they is sort of taken out. It doesn't say we offered them, but it does say, it does make it so that it feels more like we are a part of it. And then the verses from Numbers again on Shabbat, 2 yearling lambs. Now, that's when we sing Musaf, the repetition of the Musaf, we spend a lot of time on that. Uvayom, 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 ha-Shabbat. Uvayom, 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 ha-Shabbat. Which if we translated it would sound something like, on the day, on the day, on the day, on the day, on the day of Shabbat, 2 yearling lambs without blemish, together with 2/10 of a measure of choice flour, with oil mixed in as a meal offering with the proper libation, a burnt offering for every Shabbat, in addition to the daily burnt offering and its libation. It's a little bit funny that we sing that with the tune, Hola Shabbat, this Shabbat. So now, just a moment of appreciation for these 2 paragraphs. The theme here is really tight, right? The opening, God, these sacrifices help us, this mentioning these sacrifices helps us to really appreciate Shabbat in a different kind of way. This is about connecting that sacred meal, that holy meal that our ancestors used to offer to God as a special Shabbat offering, and we're going to mention that sacred meal as a way of reminding ourselves that Shabbat is to be savored. And the theme of the love that God has for the Jewish people, and that we are doing Shabbat out of love, out of a sense of connection, that continues throughout the Musaf service. I think my favorite part is lovingly, the additional Shabbat sacrifices were offered there as you commanded. It's very, very powerful. So we move now to the third paragraph of the Musaf service, which you can find on the bottom of page 435. Those who celebrate Shabbat rejoice in your kingship, hallowing the seventh day, calling it delight. All of them truly enjoy your goodness, for it pleased you to sanctify the seventh day, calling it the most desirable day, a reminder of creation. And that's the 1985 version. Here's the version as it exists in the 1998 version. Those who celebrate Shabbat rejoice in your sovereignty and hallow the seventh day, calling it a delight. All of them truly enjoy your goodness, for it pleased you to sanctify the seventh day, calling it the most desirable day, a reminder of creation. And we have from the Orthodox Siddur, those who keep the Shabbat and call it a delight shall rejoice in your kingship. The people who sanctify the seventh day shall all be satisfied and take delight in your goodness. For you favored the seventh day and declared it holy. You called it the most desirable of days in remembrance of creation. And finally, our 2016 conservative text. Those who observe Shabbat and call it a delight will rejoice in your sovereignty. The people who sanctify the seventh day shall all be fulfilled and shall delight in your abundant goodness. You have loved the seventh day and sanctified it, calling it the most beloved of days, a symbol of the work of creation. I think, to me, that feels like the most authentic of the translations. Chemda is the word that is translated in many of these as desirable, but I think beloved is a better translation of that word. Sort of thinking about if you called your child Hamudi, meaning beloved or my beloved, my cute one, my Hamud, my beloved. It's not the same as you wouldn't translate that as desired. It's Hemda is more loving and caring than desire, it seems to me. Then we have the same paragraph that closes all of the Shabbat Amidot. This is the same in all of them. Our God and God of our ancestors, accept our Shabbat offering of rest. Add holiness to our lives with your mitzvot, and let your Torah be our portion. Fill our lives with your goodness and gladden us with your triumph. Cleanse our hearts, and we shall serve you faithfully, lovingly, and willingly. Lord our God, grant that we inherit your holy gift of Shabbat forever, so that your people Israel, who hallow your name, will always find rest on this day. Praised are you, Lord, who hallows Shabbat. And to hear it in the 1998 edition, our God and God of our ancestors, find favor in our Shabbat rest. Instill in us the holiness of your mitzvot, and let your Torah be our portion. Fill our lives with your goodness, and gladden us with your triumph. Cleanse our hearts so that we may serve you faithfully, lovingly, and willingly. Adonai, our God, grant that we inherit your holy Shabbat, so that the people Israel who hallow your name will always find rest on this day. Praised are you, Adonai, who hallows Shabbat. And in the Orthodox Siddur, our God and God of our ancestors, find favor in our rest. Make us holy through your commandments, and grant us our share in your Torah, satisfy us with your goodness, grant us joy in your salvation, and purify our hearts to serve you in truth. In love and favor, Lord our God, grant us the heritage of your holy Sabbath, so that Israel, who sanctify your name, may find rest on it. Blessed are you, Lord, who sanctifies the Sabbath. And finally, our most recent translation. Our God and God of our ancestors, embrace our rest. Make us holy through your mitzvot, and let the Torah be our portion. Fill our lives with your goodness and gladden us with your deliverance. Purify our hearts to serve you truly. Adonai, our God, lovingly and willingly grant that we inherit your holy Shabbat, that the people Israel who make your name holy may find rest on this day. Baruch atah Adonai, who makes Shabbat holy. So I guess one of the takeaways that I hope you have from this exercise in comparative translation is that I have a great deal of respect and admiration for the folks who worked to produce this Siddur, Siddur Lev Shalem, our most recent conservative Siddur, which I think, first of all, I think the translation in it is beautiful, but I also think the translation more authentically gets at the meaning of the words and helps us to understand what we're praying in a way that is clear and understandable. I find in some ways the translation that we have been using in the Harlow Siddurs, both the full Sim Shalom and the Slim Shalom for weekdays, the Slim Shalom for Shabbat and festivals, I find the Harlow translation to be a little bit stilted. Certainly it lies in the sense that it just doesn't translate everything. It carefully omits certain parts of the Hebrew in its translation. As I mentioned earlier, as if to say, we don't trust you to really understand what these words mean. And while I like the commitment of the Orthodox Siddur to the traditional words in Hebrew, I actually think that there is a real sensitivity to the themes of this prayer that our conservative Siddur manages to uphold while changing just enough to make it more true to what we really believe and what we're really praying about. So to zoom back out and to leave us with a couple of lessons before we conclude, the Musaf service is, in fact, its own part in how we savor Shabbat. Similar to the special Shabbat meals, which we're supposed to eat 3 full meals on Shabbat. Similar to that, the Musaf service is about savoring, about being in connection with Shabbat. It is not simply a repetition of the same words. It is something holy and beautiful. And it is commanded from the Torah. It replaces the additional sacrifice that was offered on Shabbat in the temple. Where the traditional Musaf service says, in the future we will return to Jerusalem and offer these sacrifices again, the conservative Siddur has changed that to focus instead on the fact that our ancestors offered these additional sacrifices in the past. I personally have a problem with the pronoun they in that context, because it feels to me like the Rasha, like the wicked child at the Seder, who says, what does this all mean to you? And by saying to you, he excludes himself. He makes it as if he is not included in the Jewish people. To me, saying our ancestors, they offered these things, as opposed to our ancestors, we offered these things, makes it seem like we're trying to be totally disjointed from them, instead of seeing ourselves as a natural continuation of them. It's not, to me, it's not a problem to change the tense of the prayer. It's okay to talk about that this Musaf offering was offered in the past in the temple. That's okay, but say we offered it in the past in the temple. Don't say they offered it in the past in the temple. Because believe that we are a continuation of that tradition. And then the theme of the delight and the love and the savoring of Shabbat, which comes throughout all of our prayers about Shabbat, but especially in the Musaf service, where we are describing that delight that we have of worshiping and serving God in this way. Oneg Shabbat, delight on Shabbat, is part of the mitzvah of Shabbat. Later on today, in my sermon, I'm going to be teaching a little bit about hand washing on Shabbat and the importance of that and how it's connected to this week's Torah portion. But each of these rituals, which have its basis in the temple worship, are still important today because of the themes that they carry out. That is to say, the special Musaf offering of Shabbat was a time where Israelites were in temple period were able to delight in sharing a meal with God, and to do so in a special way. And so we too try to make our Shabbat meal, our Shabbat table, into that kind of a altar, into that kind of a special sacred place where we are able to share a meal with those around the table and with the divine presence. So I hope this Iyun Tefillah, this deep dive into the Musaf service, has helped to add a little bit more significance to Musaf for you. And we will again be meeting for Iyun Tefillah in 2 months' time, in the month of June, for our final deep dive into the end of the prayer service, which we will study the Aleinu together on that one. In May, our L'chu Neranenah program will be a musical Psukei de Zimra. We've been alternating. We've been doing L'chu Neranenah every month, but every other month it's been Iyun Tefillah, learner service, and every other month it's been a musical Psukei de Zimra. I hope you'll join us for our last 2 L'chu Neranenah services of the year. Shabbat Shalom. That's why I brought him up here. Shabbat Shalom. Have I mentioned we should get the Siddur Lev Shalem Siddurim? Yeah. I know. Every time I read the translation, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe we're still using. No, I do really love Rabbi Jonathan Sachs's translations and interpretations and commentary in the Torah and Siddur. I certainly wouldn't recommend going to art school. But the Torah in Siddur has some good things going for it, but it is not egalitarian. I would prefer to. Yeah, it's not negotiable. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. I am 9:45. Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. We're going to begin now. If you had been with us from 9 o'clock to 9:45, we had a wonderful opportunity to study the Musaf service together as a deep dive, an iyun tefillah, a deep dive into one specific prayer. That's part of our ongoing program called L'chun Ranana, Spiritual Seeking, on Shabbat morning before tefillot. This morning, our regular service will begin with Baruch She'amar. Steve Schmidt is leading us. Baruch She'amar, page 54.
Baruch She'amar v'haya ha'olam Baruch hu Baruch Oseh Bereshit Baruch Omer ve'oseh Baruch Ozer u'mekayim Baruch merachem al ha'aretz Baruch merachem al ha'briot Baruch meshalem sachar tov lireyaha Baruch chai la'ad v'kayaham lanetzach Baruch Hodeu Matzil, Baruch Shemoho. Baruch Yachid Chei Ha'elamim, Melech Meshuba Mefoar, Arei Ad Shemo HaGadol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Mehulahal Batishbacho.
You may be seated as we continue with Nishmat, page 334.
Nishmat kol chai, Tevarech et Shimcha Adonai Eloheinu, Baruch HaBasardi. Nehalalecha u'neshabechacha u'nefarek et shem kodshecha Kamor l'David barchi nafshi et Adonai V'chol keravai et shem kodsho Ha'el b'tatzumo uzecha Hagadol b'kvod shemecha Hagibor lanetzach v'honora b'norotecha HaMelech HaYoshev al kisei ram v'nisaha.
The formal chanting of Shacharit begins on page 336 with the words Shochen Ad.
Shochen ad maharom v'kadoho shemoho v'chatuv ranenu tzadikim badonai l'sharim navati laha v'fi sharim tid halal v'b'divrei tzadikim tid barach Uvilshon Chasidim Tid Romam, Uvakarev Kedoshim Tid Kadash, Uvamachalot Rivavot, Amcha Beit Yisrael, Berina It Parshemecha, Malkin Vechol Dor Vador, Sheken Chovot Kol Haitzurim Lefanecha, Adonai Eloheinu, Elohei Avoteinu, Lehodot, lehalel, leheshabeach, lefa'er l'romem, lehadir l'orech, le'ale ulkale, Al kol divrei shirot v'tishbechot, David ben Yishai, Avdecha Meshichecha.
Please rise for Yishtabach, page 338.
Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu, Ayel HaMelech HaGadol HaShemayim U'Va'aretz, Ki Lecha Na'er Adonai Eloheinu V'Elohei Avoteinu, Shiru Shvacha Hol V'Zimra Ozu Memshala, Netzach Gedula Ugvura, Tehila V'Tiferet, Kedusha U'Malchut, Brachot Ve'Hodaot Me'ata Ve'ad Olam, Baruch Atah Adonai HaMelech Gadol Batishbachot, El Ha'odaot Adon HaNiflaot, Habocher B'Shirei Zimra, Melech El Chei HaOlamim.
We continue with the prayers for introducing the Shema, Kriyat Shema, page 346.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or v'orei choshech osei shalom v'orei atah kol hakol yishov.
Sorry, 340.
Ein ke'erchacha Adonai Eloheinu ba'olam hazeh, ve'ein zelutecha malkeinu l'chayei holam haba, efes biltecha go'aleinu limot hamashiach, ve'ein domeh lecha moshienu litchiyat hametim.
Page 342.
El Adon al kol ha'masim baruch u'mevorach befi kol neshama godlo v'tuvo malei olam da'at u'tvuna sovevi moto hamid ka'el chayot ha'kodesh v'nedar bechavod ha'merchava Zechut u'mishol lifnei chiso, chesed v'rachamim lifnei chevoto. Tovim me'orot shebara Eloheinu, yitzaram beda'at b'bina u'maskel, koach u'gvura natan bahem liot moshlim bekerev tevel. Meleim zivu mefikim noga nae zivam bechol haolam שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם עושים בהמה רצון קונם פאר וכבוד נותנים לשנוס אוהלה ורינה לזכר מלכותו קרא לשמש ויזרח ראה והתקין צורת הבנה שבח נותנים לו כל צבא המרום תפארת וגדולה שרפים ואופנים וחיות הקודש לאל אשר שבת מכל המעשים Shabbat Titbarach Moshienu al shevach ma'aseh yadecha ve'al mehorei or she'asita yefaruhu chasela. Titbarach tzurenu malkeinu bekoalenu borei kedoshim yishtabach shukam ha'malkeinu. Kulam ahuvim, kulam burim, v'kulam giborim, v'kulam osim, be'ema v'yira retzon konaham, וכולם פותחי את פיכם בקדושה וטהרה, בשירה ובזמרה, ומברכים ומשבחים, ומפארים ומעריצים, ומקדישים וממליכים. את שם האל, המלך הגדול, הגבורנו הקדוש הוא, וכולם מקבלים עליהם עול מלכות שמיים זה מזה, ונותנים רשות זה לזה, להקדיש ליוצרם בנחת רוח, בשפה ברורה ובנימה קדושה. כולם כאחד עונים ואומרים ביראה, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ כבודו. והאופנים וחיות הקודש ברעש גדול מתנסים, לעומת שרפים, לעומתם משבחים ואומרים, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. לאל ברוך נעמות ייתנו, מלך החי וקיים. אור חדש על ציון תאיר, 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 ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו, ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו. ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות.
Page 346.
אהבה רבה אהבתנו, אדוני אלוהינו, חמלה גדול אביתרה, חמלת עלינו. אבינו מלכנו, בעבור אבותינו, שבטו בך, אבינו מלכנו. ותלמדם חוקי חיים, כן תכוננו למדנו, אבינו האב הרחמן, רחם עלינו. ותן בליבנו להבין ולהשכיל לשמוע, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות, ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. והאר עינינו בתורתך, ודבק לבנו במצוותיך, ויחל לבבנו לאהבה וליראה את שמך, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, כי בשם קודשך הגדול הנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. והביאנו לשלום, מארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו. כי אל פועל ישועות נתת, ובנו בחרת מכל עם ולשון, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול, סלע באמת. להודות Uyachedcha, Uyachedcha be'ahava. Baruch atah Adonai, Abocher be'amo Yisrael be'ahava.
Shema
Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol vavcha, u'b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol me'odecha, ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele, asher anochi mitzavecha, hayom al levavecha, v'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta habam, v'shivtecha b'veitecha, u'lektecha v'terech, u'v'shoktecha u'v'kumecha, u'kshartam liot al yadecha, ve'hayu letotafot bein einecha, u'ktavtam al mezuzot beitecha, u'v'hisharecha. Ve'hayu. Lord. Adonai Elohechem emet. Emet v'yatziv v'nachon v'kayim. Ledor vador hu kayam ushmo kayam v'chiso nachon u'malchuto v'emunato la'ahad kayamet udvarav chayim v'kayamin. Emet she'atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Malkeinu melech Avotenu go'aleinu go'el Avotenu Yotzreinu tzur Yeshuatenu Podenu matzilenu me'olam shemecha Ein Elohim zulatecha Ezrat Avotenu atahu me'olam.
We're in the middle of page 350.
Tehilot le'elyon baruch hu mevorach Moshe uvnei Israel lechanu shirah v'simcha rabah ve'amruhu chulam Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai Mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh norad iloto sefeleh Shira chadasha shibchu geulim l'shimcha ha'asfat hayam Yachad kulam hodu v'himlichu ve'amru Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed.
We rise, page 352, for Tzur Yisrael, followed by the Amidah for Shabbat morning, which begins on page 354. We begin together with Steve for the beginning of the Amidah, and after the Kiddushah, we continue with the individual whispered Amidah individually. Sur Yisrael, page 352.
Sur Yisrael, Kuma Bezrat Yisrael, Uvdechinu Mecha Yehuda Yisrael, Go Aleinu Adonai Tzvaot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avoteinu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'konei HaKol V'zocher Chastei Avot Umevi Goel Livnei Bneihem Leman Shemo B'Ahava Melech Ozer Ufokeinu Mashiach Umagen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayim Eitim Atarav Lehoshia Mechakel Chaim Bechesed Mechayim Eitim Berachamim Rabim Somech Noflim Berofei Cholim Umatir Asurim Umekayim Emunato Lishenei Afar Michamocha Bal Gevurot Umido Melach Melech Memit Umechaye Umatmiach Yeshua B'ne'eman Atah Hachayod Metim Baruch atah Adonai Mechaye HaMetim Nekadesh Shim Havolam Geshem Shemakti Shimoto Bishmem Harom Kakatuva Yad Neviecha Vekaraz El Zeveyahamar Kadosh 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 Adonai Tzvaot Melech Kol Haaretz Kevodo Az Bekol Rosh Gadol Adir V'Chazak Mashmim Kol Mitnasim Lumatzrafim Leumatam Baruch Yomeru Baruch Kevod Adonai Mimkomo Mimkomcha Malkeinu Tofia Miktim Loch Aleinu Kimacha Kimanagnu Lach Mimkomcha Malkeinu Tofia Vetim Loch Aleinu Kimacha Kimanagnu Lach Matai Timloch Bet Zion Matai Timloch Bet Zion Bekarov Beyamenu Leolam Va'ed Tishkon Bekarov Beyamenu Leolam Va'ed Tishkon Tit Gadol v'tit Kadash B'tok Yerushalayim Ircha L'tohor v'adoru Netzach u'lenetzach netzachim V'einenu tiren David Meshiach Tzidkecha Yimloch Adonai Le'olam Elohai Zion L'dor Vador Hallelujah L'dor Vador Nagid God Lecha L'netzach Netzakim Kedushatcha Nakdish V'shivchacha Eloheinu Mipinu Le'emush Le'olam Va'ed Ki Melech Gadol V'kadosh Ata Baruch Atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh.
If you haven't completed your individual whispered Amidah, please continue davening. We join together for Kaddish Shalem, page 392.
Yikra v'ikra shmei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'almad yirach yeruteh, ve'amlik malchuteh, v'chai chonu v'yachonu, v'chai dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agalav yizman kri v'imeru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach, ve'alam na'oleh me'almaya, yitbarach. Yitbarach v'ishtabach v'yitbar v'yirma v'yinaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudesha, b'richu. Leila min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechmata, damiran me'alma v'imeru. Amen. Tikabat sotonu v'adhon, dechol Yisrael kadama, v'hon v'ishmaya v'imeru. Amen. Yehi shlam ha'rava min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imeru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mrama, hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imeru. Amen.
We continue with the service for taking the Torah out of the Ark, page 394.
Psalm for Shabbat?
Oh, yep, that's right. We continue with the Psalm for Shabbat, page 32.
Hayom Yom Shabbat Kodesh Shibu Hayom Hayu Halavim Omrihim Bevet Hamikdash Mizmor Shir LeYom HaShabbat Oh, Yinavun Beseva, the Shenim Vera'ananim Yuhu, the Hakiki Ashara Nahai, Tsuhuri, Velo Avlata Boho.
Kaddish Avelim, Mourner's Kaddish, page 52. Yitgadal, V'yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Ve'alma, Divra, Kirute, V'yamlich Malchute, V'chayechon, Uvyomechon, Uvchaye, Defol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala, Uvizman, Kariv, V'imru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah, Mevarach, Le'alam, Olamei, Almaya. Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpahar, V'yitromam, V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shmei Dekudesha, Brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'imru, Amen.
Amen.
Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom imramad, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen.
Amen.
We continue with the service for taking the Torah out of the ark, page 394.
Do I come up for this part?
Yeah, Dan, you're going to open the ark and take the Torah out. Yeah.
Moment of sanitation. Ein kamocha ve'elohim Adonai ve'ein kemahasecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim umemshaltecha bechol dor vador Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai imloch leolam va'ed Adonai oz le'amo yitein Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom Av harachamim eitiv avir tzoncha et Zion Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim Ki v'cha levad batachnu Melech el ram v'nisa Adon olamim. We rise as the ark is opened. Vayhi bin so Aharon, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, Ve'afutsu oivecha, Ve'anusu misanecha mipanecha, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah Udavar Adonai mi Yerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Le'amo Yisrael B'kedushato B'rik Shmei Yom Be anara Kadisha, Kadisha Yakira, Ana Emar Tushbechan, Yehe Rava Kodamach, Detiv Tachlibi Beoraita, Vetashli Mishalin Delibi, Veli Badechol Amach Yisrael, Letavu L'chayin Veli Shlam. Amen. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Gadlu Ladonai iti, uneromema Shemo Yakdav. Lecha Adonai Hagdula, V'Hagevura, V'Hatiferet, V'Hanetzach, V'Hahod, Hicho B'Shamayim U'Ba'aretz. Lecha Adonai HaMamlacha, V'Haminaseh, V'Chol Erosh. Romemu, 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 Adonai Eloheinu, V'Hishtachavu, V'Hishtachavu, L'Hadom Raglav Kadoshu. Romemu, Romemu, Adonai Eloheinu, V'Hishtachavu, V'Hishtachavu, L'Har Kodsho Ki Kadosh, Adonai Eloheinu.
Please remain standing for the Hagbah. As you know, we've been doing Hagbah at the beginning of the Torah service so that anybody who has been honored with a aliyah to the Torah can have a visual recognition of the text of the Torah at this point and then think about it when they say the blessings. Lift first.
I'm just looking for the place where it is.
Well, while Dan's finding the parsha, let me just orient everybody. We're reading this morning Parashat Tazria and Parashat Metzora. Tazria and Metzora, you found it?
Got it.
Please rise for the Hagbah. V'zot HaTorah asher sa Moshe Livnei b'nei Yisrael api Adonai Shabbat Shalom. You may be seated. Welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. This morning we're reading, first Yasher Koach to Steve for leading us in Shacharit. This morning we're reading from Parashat Tazria Mitzorah. Parashat Tazria Mitzorah deals with issues of oozes and sores and blood and discharges and seminal emissions, and all of the above have spiritual significance in the context of thinking about purity and impurity in the context of the sacrificial system. Most of these categories are not relevant in today's Judaism, not specifically relevant in today's Judaism, because as we do not have a sacrificial system anymore, we worry less about the issues of purity and impurity with regard to our personal status. We no longer have the theological assumption that impurity is repellent to the divine presence, that is to say, spiritual impurity, and we no longer have most of this system. Later in my Dvar Torah, I will be addressing the aspects of this system that have indeed carried through into rabbinic Judaism. It's interesting to be reading these parshiot in the context of our COVID world, because the person with the mitzorah, the person with tzarat, is isolated from the community, is quarantined. And we think, I couldn't help but think about our practices of quarantine and social distancing and separation when I was thinking about this Torah portion. The person with tzarat has to go to a special part of the camp, outside of the camp. They have to stay there for a certain specified amount of time. The official in charge, in this case the priest, but the priest as the medicine man, the priest as the one who understands all of the intricacies of the different types of lesions that a person can have. The priest has to check you out, and only upon receiving, being checked out, and then having an additional 7-day period, are you welcome back into the community. The distance that a person with tzarat has to stay away from everybody else is 4 cubits. A cubit is about 1.5 feet. That would be 6 feet. So we have an interesting connection with regard to these ancient laws and the way that they might be connected to our own practices. Certainly, as we are in this process of figuring out what it means to be comfortable in synagogue once again, that is, comfortable after an absence of a time, comfortable what it means to feel like it is safe to be in a group with large number of people or a medium number of people. After a year of being isolated in our own family units, the leadership of the congregation is thinking very seriously about what it means to be making sure that our sanctuary space feels like a safe space for everybody to be present, for those who wish to come in person to be able to feel safe coming in person. That's one of the reasons why we are wearing masks, why we are maintaining distance, why we're singing quietly, why we're sitting farther apart than we otherwise usually would. And it's important to us to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and welcomed in our community, and therefore to try to stay in accordance with the policies that have been laid out by our reopening committee. As a greater proportion of the general population, and of course of our specific population, has become vaccinated and may, because of that vaccination status, feel more comfortable about being present, I know that the reopening committee will have to be thinking about in what ways do we feel safe about different aspects of our policy. But I think it's important for us to continue to have respect for, just as the ancient Israelites had respect for the rules around governing around tzara'at and the mitzorah, so we also have to make sure that we are making our communities a place that feels welcoming and safe for everybody who desires to attend. I invite you now to turn with me to the middle of Parashat Tazria, Leviticus chapter 13, verse 40, page 657, 657. Vayazor v'yagin v'yoshia l'chol achosim bo v'nomar amen. Hakol havu godol inu kavod laTorah tamod. Hindabat Ezrachaim v'itka Lalia Rishona Baruch Shonatan Torah L'Amo Yisrael B'Kedushato V'atem Adveikim B'Adonai Elohechem Chaim Kulchem Hayom
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Baruch Hu Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bacher Banu Mikol Hamim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Notein HaTorah.
Amen. Page 657, verse 40.
Amen. Ve'ish ki maret rosho kerehu taharhu v'im mipat panav yimaret rosho ki va'ahu taharhu v'chi yeh bakarachat o bagavachat nega lavan adam dam tzarachat hu he bikarachto, o bikarachto, ra'oto, akohen. V'hinei se'eh hanega, livana adam demet, bikarachto, o bikarachto, kemaret torat, or basar ish, basar. Isharua hu tame yitamenu hakohen barosho nigo v'atzarua asher bo hanega begada v'hayu paru mim rosho yeh parua alsfam yate v'tame yikra Kol yimei asher hanegabo yitame hu badad yoshev meichutz lemachane moshavo.
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Natan Lanu Torah Emet V'chayei Olam Netav B'Tachenu Baruch Ata Adonai Notein HaTorah.
Amen. Tamod. Aharona bat Meir Yitzchak V'Fruma Aliyah Hashenit. The second Aliyah can be found on page 658, chapter 13, verse 47. And I meant to say it for Anita's Aliyah, but when we did Baruch earlier today, we did not have a minyan, so we skipped over Baruch. So this Baruch is counting for that Baruch. So I invite everybody to rise for Baruch at the beginning of Jackie's Aliyah.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Notein HaTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'abeged ki bo negat sarat. V'abeged semer o v'abeged pishtim. O vashti o va'erev l'pishtim. V'letamer o v'or, o b'chol melachet or, v'haya hanega v'rak o adam dam, v'beged or ba'or o bashti, o ba'erev o b'chol kli or, negatarat hu, v'hara et hakohen, v'ra hakohen et hanega, v'hizgir et hanega, shivat yamim, v'ra et hanega, bayom hashvi'i, ki pasha hanega, b'beged, hanega b'beged, or bashti, or ba'erev, or ba'or, l'chol asher yaseh ha'or, limlacha tarat mam eret hanaga tamehu b'saraf et habeged or et hashti or et ha'erev batemer o b'bishtim o et kol kali ha'or asher yebo hanaga ki tarat mam eret hu ba'esh tisarei Imyarei hakohen, v'hinei lo pasha hanega.
Fasa.
Pasha hanega ba'beged o vashti o ba'erev o b'chol kli or v'tziva hakohen v'pibesu et asher bo Hanaga v'hiskiru Shivat Yamim Shenit.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher natan lanu Torah temet b'chayei olam nata b'tokeinu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Talmud. Talmud, Esther bat Eliyahu v'Tzipora, Aliyah Shalishit. The third Aliyah can be found on page 658, chapter 13, verse 55.
Baruch et Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Olam Ba'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Ba'ed. Baruch et Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher b'charbanu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch et Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. V'ra hakohen acharei hukabes et hanega v'hinei lo hafach hanega et eno v'hanega lo fasa tamehiv hu ba'esh tisrfenu bechetetiv Bekarachto o begavachto v'imim ra hakohen v'hinei keha hanega acharei hakesoto v'kara oto min ha-beged min ha'or o min ha'ashti O min ha'erev, v'im tera'od, ba'beged, o vashti, o ba'erev, o b'chol kali or, horachat hiv ba'esh tisarfenu et asher bo hanaga, v'ha'beged, o hashti, o ha'erev, o chol kali ha'or asher t'chabes, v'sar mehem hanaga, v'chubash sheni v'taher, zod, torat nega torat, ba'beged had semer o ha'bishtim, O hashti, o ha'erev, o chokali, or l'taharo, o l'tamo.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Shkaf Yamod. The fourth Aliyah can be found at the top of page 660, chapter 14, verse 1.
Yeah. It was just the beginning of the last one.
So you all should know, for those who are watching from home, the verses got a little confused in the assignment, and the first two verses of what Ellie just read, she learned just now during Shachri. She did a wonderful, wonderful job, and as you saw, she really picked up once she got to the part that she had learned in advance. So this one will be of usual excellent quality. Chapter 14, verse 1.
Baruch hu et Adonai Baruch.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Vaydaber Adonai al Moshe lemor, zo tiyeh Torah hamitzorah b'yom taharato, uhuva el hakohen, v'yatza hakohen el michutz lamachaneh, v'ra'ah hakohen v'hineh, nirpa nega hatarat min hataruah, v'tiva hakohen v'lakach v'mitaher, shetei tziparim chayot tahorot, v'eit erez ushni tola'at v'ezov, v'tiva hakohen v'shalcha et hatzipor ha'echat, El kli cheres
Al Mayim Chayim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Ya'amod. Nachman ben Avram Alchunen Aliyah Chamishit. The fifth Aliyah can be found on page 661, chapter 14, verse 6.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamborach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Et hatzipor achaya badam.
Yikach.
Yikach oto.
I'm in the wrong place.
Ota.
I'm in the wrong place. Et hatzipor.
Et Tzipor Chaya comes,
Yeah,
you're
we're
one
on
line below. Go back up a line.
Here we go. Amen. Et hatzipor achaya yikach ota v'eit eitz ha'erez v'eit shnei hatola'at v'et ha'ezov v'taval otam v'et hatzipor achaya v'badam hatzipor hashchuta al hamayim hachayim v'hiza ala mitaher min hatora'at sheva ha'pa'amim v'taru v'shilach et hatzipur hachaya al ha'pnei hasadeh v'chibes hamitaher begadav v'gilach et kol sa'oro v'rachat b'mayim v'taher v'acher yavo el hamachaneh v'yashav michutz la'alo shivat yamim v'haya bayom hashvi yigalach et kol saro et rosho v'et gano v'et givat enav v'et kol saro Yigaleach v'chibes et biga dov v'rachat et besoro b'mayim v'taher וביום השמיני ייקח שני כבשים תמימים וכבשה אחת בת שנתה תמימה 3 עשרונים סולת מנחה בלולה בשמן לוג אחד שמן והעמיד הכהן המטהר את האיש המטהר ואותם לפני אדוני פתע אוהל מועד ולקח הכהן את הכבש האחד והקריב אותו וישם את לוג השמן והניף אותם תנופה לפני אדוני.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. The 6th Aliyah can be found on page 661, chapter 14, verse 30.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'nata lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'shachat et hakebes b'makom asher yishchad et hachatat v'et ha'olah b'makom hakodesh ki kechatat hasham hu lakohen kodesh kedoshim hu v'lakach hakohen Midam Hasham v'natan hakohen al tanuch ozen hamitaher hayemonit al bahen yado hayemonit v'al bahen raglo hayemonihi v'lakach hakohen milok hashemen v'yitzak al kaf hakohen hasmalihi v'taval hakohen et etzba'o hayemonit min hashemen asher al kapo hasmalit V'hiza min hashemen v'etzba'o sheva pamim lifnei Adonai mitaher hashemen
Umiyeter.
mitaher
Yeter.
umitaher hashemen asher al kapo yitein hakohen al tanuch ozen hamitaher hayemonit al bahen yado hayemonit v'al bahen raglav hayemonit al dam ha'asham v'hanotar v'shemen asher al kaf hakohen yitain al rosh hamitaher v'kaper alav hakohen lifnei Adonai v'yasa hakohen et hachatat v'kiper al hamitaher mitumato ve'achar yishchat et ha'olah ve'olah ad hakohen et ha'olah ve'et hamincha ve'et hamincha hamizbecha v'kiper alav hakohen
v'etaher.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Yamod. Aliyah Shevi'it. The 7th Aliyah can be found on page 662 at the last verse, verse 21.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam
Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim V'Natan Lanu Et Torato Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'im dalhu v'yein yado misheget
Maseget.
Maseget b'lakach keves echad asham litnufa l'kaper alav yisaron solet echad b'lu b'shemen lamincha v'lo shamen u'shtei torim o shnei b'nei yona asher tasig yado v'haya echad hatat v'chatat v'echad olah Allah v'hevio tam bayom hashmini l'tarato el hakohen el pedao el moed lifnei Adonai v'lakach hakohen et keves hasham yedlog hashemen l'hanifotam hakohen tenufo lifnei Adonai V'shachat et keves hasham, v'lakach hakohen midam hasham, v'natan al tanuv ozen hamitaher hayimonit, al bahen yado hayimonit, v'al bahen raglo hayimonit, min hashemen yitzak hakohen, al kaf hakohen hasmali, v'hiza hakohen, v'etzba'o hayimonit, min hashemen asher al kapo hasmali sheva pamim lifnei Adonai v'natan hakohen min hashemen asher al kapo al hatanu ozen hamitaher hayimonit v'al bahen yado hayimonit v'al bahen raglo hayimonit al makom dam hasham Hanotar min hashemen asher al kaf hakohen yitain al rosh hamitaher l'kaper olav lifnei Adonai v'yasa et hachad min hatorim o min bnei hayona v'asher tasig yado et asher tasig yado et hachad hatat v'et hachad olah al hamincha v'kiper hakohen al hamitaher lifnei Adonai zo torat asher bo nagat torat asher lo tasig yado v'taharato. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher natan lanu Torah bemet v'chayei olam natav v'tachenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. We rise as the ark is open for the healing prayer. Misha beirach avotenu mekor habracha ve'imotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha beirach avotenu Abraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah v'Yitzchak Rachel v'Leah v'Yivarech v'Yirpeh Tacholim. Et Shai Aviad ben Balfour et Fegalea ba Minsasura et Shalom ben Chaya et Ruchel bad Avram et Andrew Francis Parisi V'yed Yudit bad Reuben Berezel et Sharon Nachama bad Reuben Berezel et Gabriel Mordechai ben Pesi et Omari Gray et Chaya bat Dvorah et Leah bat Dvorah et Yakira bat Dvorah et Puma bat Gitzel et Dina bat Fegla et Eliza bat Dina et Akiva ben Gitzel et Miriam bat Malka et Eliyahu ben Malka, et Bracha bat Batya, et Miriam bat Sarah, et Menachem Mendel ben Zipporah, et Gershom ben Leah, et Robert Borschwitz, et Yoreh bat Abram Besara, et Kyle Scheffler, et Cecilia Lynn, et Michal Ruth bat Tova, et Linda Pearlstein, et Robert Pearlstein, Vet Michael Roberts, Vet Eric Hurst, Vet Riva Bela, Bad Reza, Vet Sima Freda, Bad Chanayenta, Vet Chanasora, Bad Susha Nachama, Vet Shlomo Moshe, Bet Miriam, Vet Yita Masha, Bat Ruchel, Vet Dylan Middleton, Vet Yaakov Moshe ben Batya Mindel, Vet Perry Bat Shulamit, Vet Manish Yisachar ben Rachel, Vet Shmuel ben Yudit, Vet Usher Yosef ben Fega Malka, Vet Chaim Reuven ben Hinda, Vet Amy Laughlin, Vet Vet kol achavim v'gilag d'shah zod hakadosh baruch hu yimalei rachamim aleihem lachzikam l'rapotam mishlach lehem meira refuat shema min hashamayim refuat hanefesh refuat haguf b'tok shar cholei Yisrael v'ha'olam v'chazek yidei oskim b'tzorcheihem shabbatim azok v'ha'refuat krava lavo hashabag alav zman kariv v'nomar amen Mishe be'irachim oteinu Mekor habracha lavoteinu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Ark is closed and we remain standing for Chatzi Kaddish. Yitzkada v'yitzkada shemei rabba ve'amad yivrach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayei yomei chonuv chayei decho beit Yisrael bagala ubizman kariv imeru amen Yeshmei rabba mevarach Le'alam l'almei almaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramam v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal Shmei Kedusha b'richu Le'lam yidko b'chata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechemata Damiran be'alma v'imeru Amen Yamod. Haim ben Getzel ben Itzel. Likriyata Haftarah. You may be seated as we continue with the Maftir Aliyah, which can be found on page 663, chapter 14, verse 30.
Baruchu et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. It starts Ve'asa et ha'echad min hatorim.
Verse 30, right?
Yeah.
Amen. V'yasa et ha'echad min hatorim umin b'nei hayona asher tasig yado et asher tasig yado et ha'echad hakatat v'et echad olah al hamincha v'kiper hakohen al hamitaher lifnei Adonai zo torat Asher bo negat zarat asher lo tasig yado b'taharata.
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet V'chayei Olam Nata B'tochenu Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Ellie and Dan are now going to wrap the Torah to do Galila, and I invite you to turn to the Haftarah for Tazria Mitzorah, which can be found on page 676 from the book of 2 Kings, chapter 7. Of course, the connection here is the association of this haftarah with the affliction known as leprosy or tzara'at. This is the story of the lepers who, while they were exiled from the community, ended up saving the community. It's an important lesson for us all in terms of the people on the edges of society, the people on the fringes of society, the people that society leaves out, and the ways in which we should or should not treat the individuals on the margins of society. I invite you to follow along from the book of 2 Kings, chapter 7, verse 3, page 676.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'neviim tovim ורצה בדבריהם הנאמרים באמת. Baruch atah Adonai הבוחר בתורה ובמשה עבדו ובישראל עמו ובנביאי האמת והצדק. וארבעה אנשים היו מצורעים פתח השער, ויאמרו איש אל רעהו, מה אנחנו יושבים פה עד מתנו? אם אמרנו נבוא העיר, הרעב בעיר ומתנו שם, ואם ישבנו פה ומתנו, ועתה לכו ונפלא אל מחנה ארם, אם יחיונו נהיה, ואם ימיתונו ומתנו. ויקומו בנשף לבוא אל מחנה ארם, יבואו עד קצה מחנה ארם, והנה אין שם איש. ואדוני השמיע את מחנה ארם, כל רכב, כל סוס, כל חיל גדול, ויאמרו איש אל אחיו, הנה שכר עלינו מלך ישראל אל מלכי החיתים ואת מלכי מצרים לבוא עלינו. ויקומו וינוסו בנשף ויעזבו את העליהם ואת סוסיהם ואת חמוריהם המחנה כאשר היא, וינוסו אל נפשם, ויבואו המצורעים האלה עד קצה המחנה, ויבואו אל אוהל אחד, ויאכלו וישתו, ויישאו משם כסף וזהב ובגדים, וילכו ויטמינו וישובו, ויבוא אל אוהל אחר, ויישאו משם, וילכו ויטמינו, ויאמרו איש אל רעהו, לא כן אנחנו עושים. היום הזה יום בשורה הוא, ואנחנו מחשים וחיכינו את אור הבוקר, ומצאנו עוון, ועתה לכו ונבוא ונגידה בית המלך, ויבואו ויקראו אל שוער העיר, ויגידו להם לאמור, באנו אל מחנה ארם, והנה אין שם איש וכל האדם, כי אם הסוס אסור והחמור אסור, ואוהלים כאשר המה, ויקרא השוערים, ויגידו בית המלך פנימה, ויקום המלך לילה, ויאמר אל עבדיו, אגידה נא לכם את אשר עשו לנו ארם, וידעו כי רעבים אנחנו, ויצאו מן המחנה להיחווה בשדה לאמור, כי יצאו מן העיר ונתפשם שם חיים, ואת העיר נבוא. ויען אחד מעבדיו, ויאמר ויקחו נא 5 מן הסוסים הנשארים אשר נשארו בה, הינם ככל המון ישראל אשר נשארו בה, הינם ככל המון ישראל אשר תמו, ונשלחה ונראה, ויקחו 2 רכב סוסים, וישלח המלך אחרי המחנה ארם, לאמור לכו אורו, וילכו אחריהם עד הירדן, והנה כל הדרך מלאה בגדים וכלים, אשר השליכו ארם בחופזם, וישובו המלאכים, ויגידו למלך, ויצא העם, ויבוזו את מחנה ארם, ויישא סולת בשקל, ו200 שעורים בשקל, כדבר אדוני. המלך הפקיד את השליש אשר נשען על ידו על השער, וירמסו העם בשער, ויעמוד כאשר דיבר איש האלוהים, אשר דיבר ברדת המלך אליו, ויהי כדבר איש האלוהים אל המלך לאמור, 200 שעורים בשקל, וסולת בשקל יהיה כעת מחר בשער שומרון. ויען השליש את איש אלוהים, ויאמר הנה אדוני עושה ערובות בשמיים, ויהיה כדבר הזה. ויאמר הנך רואה בעיניך, ומשם לא תאכל. ויהי לו כן, וירמסו אותו העם בשער, וימות. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות, האל הנאמן, האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו, ונאמנים דבריך, ודבר אחד מדבריך אחור לא ישוב ריקם, כי אל מלך נאמן ורחמן אתה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הנאמן בכל דבריו.
אמן.
רחם על ציון כי הבאת חיינו, לא עלוות נפש תושיע במהרה בימינו. ברוך אתה אדוני משמח ציון בבניך.
אמן.
שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו באליהו הנביא עבדך, ובמלכות בית דוד משיחך,
במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו, על כיסאו לא ישב זר ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים את כבודו, כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו, שלא נחיה נרו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן דוד. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יתברך שמך בפיך חי תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת.
Amen. Yashkach.
I discovered it's hard to read when your glasses fog up from the mask.
Yes. Yashkach to Dan and Ellie and to Howie for reading Torah and for chanting the Haftarah. We continue with Ashrei, page 420. Logan, you're going to do all right. Page 420.
Ashrei Yoshvei Beiteha Odyalu Hasela Shikahalu Ashrei Tidila Aviv Armim Hahai Hamel Varahashim Halil Amvaed
Bechol Yom Avarchek Avalashim Leolam Vaed
Gadol Adonai Wameyor Vilidu Toin Heker
Dor Yishabach Masecha Gvuratecha Yagidu
Hadar Kivod Hoda Havadivrei Nifoteha Shiha
Vezuz Naratecha Yomeru Gulatcha Asaprena
Zehera Tivahaiyu Vitzitkat Hairanenu
Hadu Rachum Adonai Erech Apayim Ugdal Chatzeh
Tov Adonai La'akol V'rahama V'alkol Ma'asav
Yoducha Adonai Kol Masecha V'chatsidecha Yivarchucha
Kivod Malchut Hayomeru Ugurat Hayidaberu
Yodi Alibnei Adam Gurutav Koda Dahar Malchuta
Malchut HaMalchu Kol Amimu Mem Sholtaha V'Hador Vador
Somech Adonai Lechol Hanochim V'zokei Flefo Hakuvim
Ene Kol Hayisaberu V'Yotam Tetelhem Eteklam Beitel
Poteach et Yadecha U'Masriya Lechol Chayretzon
Tzadik Adonai Behold Deracha V'Hasid Behol Ma'asav
Karov Adonai Lechol Korav Lechol Asher Yikra'u Be'emet
Ritzon Yiriyah V'Yaseh V'et Shabbatam Mishma Yishoyem
Shomer Adonai et Kol Oavav V'et Kol Rishayim Yashmim
Tidila Adonai Yedaper V'Yebarek Kol Basar Shem Control Elam Va'et
V'anachnu nevarecha me'ata v'ad olam. Hallelujah. We rise for the service for returning the Torah to the Ark, page 422.
Yahalelu et Shem Adonai, ki niskahav Shemo levado.
Hodo alevet v'shamayim hayarem ken le'yamo teila b'chol chasidav livnei Yisrael am karovo. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. We continue individually, page 424. Mizmor LeDavid. Page 426.
Ki lekachta, oh, yuvnu chol yomar. Ki lekachto natati lachem torati al tazovu. Eitz chayim lama chazikim ba v'tom pe'ah me'ushag derachea dacheinoam v'chol netivoteha shalom Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Kadesh Kadesh Yameinu Kadesh Yameinu Tekedem. Shabbat Shalom. Before eating bread, I wash my hands. And I say a blessing. Asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tivanu al netilat yadayim, right? To sanctify that action as a commanded action. As anyone who has this practice knows, this is not a hand washing for cleanliness. It is a hand washing for ritual. The hand washing for cleanliness I do before I come to the table in the first place. So if I'm not washing my hands for cleanliness, why am I doing it? It is because in ancient times, before performing any ritual, a Kohen, a priest, was required to wash his hands, making himself pure and ready to offer a sacrifice. When the temple was destroyed in 70 CE, the table in the home came to represent the Mizbeach, the altar in the temple. The bread placed on it symbolizes the offerings that were once brought by the priests. When I wash my hands, I am invoking the temple service, Agudat Hakodesh, the holy service of God in the temple. By the way, this is also why we put salt on our bread on Shabbat. We are using the salt to invoke the idea of the altar. Just as we salt meat, so too we salt our bread. To make our table sacred, so that we share our meal not only with those present in the room, but also with the divine presence. The hand washing and the salt are not for cleanliness or for flavor, but are to draw attention to our practice, to elevate a mundane act and to make it sacred. This is also one useful way of thinking about the mitzvah, the sacred obligation of using the mikvah to sanctify sexual intercourse. The immersion in the mikvah, which according to Jewish tradition is required after menstruation and before intercourse, is not about cleanliness. It is about holiness.
It is about covenant, about connection with God and with each other. I know that some people have experienced discomfort around the requirements in Judaism, in Jewish tradition, of immersion following menstruation, thinking of the practice as out of date, perhaps describing it as medieval or even misogynistic. But as a young person, I came to love mikvah, immersion, ritual immersion, so much that I took a course in mikvah guiding at the local mikvah where I was living at the time in Boston. A mikvah guide helps to facilitate the immersions of folks who are coming to use the mikvah to mark spiritual moments in their lives. Many moments of transition, of transformation, can be marked through the use of mikvah, of ritual immersion, to show a transformation from not readiness to readiness. Just as the traditional approach is not about cleanliness, but about holiness, about a couple moving from unreadiness to unite in sexual union, from moving from unreadiness to readiness to unite in sexual union. By the way, the tradition thinks about this with regard to married couples, but I know several unmarried couples who also do this practice. After all, one of the reasons why the tradition might be opposed to premarital intercourse in the first place is out of a fear that people wouldn't be using the mikvah before they're married. Saying, yeah, anyone can use the mikvah even before you're married. Let's you sanctify even intercourse before marriage. Certainly, the rabbis were not imagining first intercourse at age 28 or 29 or 30. When the rabbis had this sense that you should only have sex within the confines of marriage, they were imagining a marriage that took place at 17 or 18 years old, which I think many people would agree is not an unreasonable first time to engage in intimate sexual relations. My friend Abigail Halpern, a rabbinical student at the Hadar Institute and a very committed teacher of Torah, wrote a Devar Torah this week about the laws around menstruation that find their source in this week's double portion of Tazria and Metzorah. She writes, the relationship between Tazria and Metzorah's discussion of tzara'at and its discussions of various bodily oozings seems natural. Both are bodily realities that led, at least in the time of the temple, to ritual impurity, and which have consequences for interactions with others. Tzara'at and ziva, non-standard emissions, have similar sacrificial rituals in order to move from purity to impurity. But there is only one part of our parshiot that remains meaningfully alive in Jewish practice today, the laws of nidah, of menstruation. The Talmud scholar Charlotte Elisheva von Robert suggests that it is the rabbinic laws around menstruation, that it is in the rabbinic laws around menstruation that the biblical laws of tzara'at find a voice. The Talmud and later codes spill much ink over discussions of fine distinctions in color of menstrual blood, which colors are problematic and therefore trigger a process of sexual abstinence and purification, and which leave a person ritually unaffected. But given that there is no discussion of colors around menstruation biblically, where does this vast literature emerge from? In Mitzorah, the Torah says of the Kohen, if when he examines the plague, the plague of the walls in the house is found to consist of greenish or reddish streaks that appear to go deep into the wall, then that kicks off a ritualized purification process. Von Roberts writes that just as in the case of skin diseases, which are an integral part of the priestly purity and impurity system in the Bible, the priest is installed as the inspector and hence the prime expert. By analogy, the successor of the priest, that is the rabbi, the rabbi is an expert on matters of purity and impurity, is installed as the inspector who, like the priest, is trained in the differentiation of colors. I will just say that my own rabbinic training did not include a section on the different colors of menstrual blood and whether they constituted pure or impure. And in our community, I would be very surprised if somebody brought an example of such to me for inspection. That said, I think that there are communities today where rabbis do in fact have that role. And while I don't desire that we should have that, I do think that we should think seriously about the ways in which Judaism teaches us to sanctify sexual relations and to sanctify such through the use of mikvah, of ritual immersion. In Von Roberts' analysis, she reminds us, or she shows, that tzara'at, leprosy, is not, in fact, as obscure as we might think. It has a rich afterlife in Jewish legal conversations about menstruation. Colors differ in every case. No two bodies or houses are the same. Both tzara'at and nidah are not blanket decrees. They are adjudicated on an individual level, based on each unique physical situation. Von Robert is not the first to connect menstruation and tzara'at on a level that is deeper than mere biblical juxtaposition, meaning that they are in fact in the same Torah portion. In the Midrashic collection Vayikra Rabbah, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak discusses the significance of the Torah's framing of these and other bodily laws. Even though they appear as if they are repulsive and dark and should be spoken in the plural as a euphemistic device to avoid talking about such things specifically or about specific people, for example, the laws of zivah and tzara'at and menstruation and childbirth, the Holy Blessed One said, "Behold, they are pleasing to me." As it says, "Then the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem shall be pleasing to the Lord as in the days of yore and the years of old." In other words, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak specifically says that God values our thinking about these important bodily functions. We worship God in part with our bodies. It is an embodied practice. You should know that it is so that, behold, the sections about the Zav and the Zavah are not said together as one, rather this one by itself and this one by itself. When any man, each has a discharge issuing from his flesh, and when a woman has had a discharge of blood. In other words, each thing has its own individual paragraph to show that God takes particular interest in each case. This midrash points to the sacred potential of those things about our bodies that we might find unpleasant or upsetting. Perhaps we don't think that we should be discussing them in synagogue. The text of the Torah, it points out, talks about these things in the singular. It is not in the general. It is not a plural group of people with emissions or a general category of people who menstruate. It is the individual person with their individual body having this experience. The Parsha is named Mitzorah, for the person who has leprosy. Just one person, the one afflicted with this disease. Our bodies, in all their experiences and our effort to make religious meaning from them, can be not only good, but beloved to God, specifically in our individuality. The Bible itself never gives a reason for why a person gets tzara'at. In context, it appears to be just an illness that sometimes happens to people. The idea that the things that are often seen as repulsive about our bodies, even the everyday things, can be sacred vehicles to connect us to God, finds voice in texts about nidah, about menstruation. The Bechor Shor, a 12th century French biblical commentator, asserts that the blood of menstruation and the observance of laws around menstruation is parallel to the blood of the covenant of circumcision. Menstruation is thus made covenantal. The menstruating person's body is a mark of their relationship with God, much as circumcision is a mark of relationship with God. The body does not bring us farther from God, but draws us closer. If, like the Bechor Shor teaches, menstruation is covenantal, what would it mean for other bodily happenings in this parasha to be understood as covenantal? What would it take for us to think of our bodies themselves, not just what we do with them, but our bodies themselves, as pleasing to God? We are in relationship to God simply by virtue of being people with bodies. Bodies that bleed and ooze and are subject to illness. Our bodies, when we bring them into our spiritual lives, not just as tools, but as bodies, that is what God wants. That is one thing we can learn from this Torah portion. God loves each of us as we are. Each of us with our body that is different from each other body. This materiality, this embodiedness, is holy. One of the reasons that I love mikvah as a ritual, the practice of immersion, is because it is one of our only mitzvot that we continue to do to this day, which is an embodied mitzvah, a mitzvah that we do with our whole self, our whole body. We only have a couple like that. You have to be your entire body in the sukkah to say the bracha leshev basukah, to say the mitzvah of dwelling, to fulfill the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah. You have to bring your entire body into the sukkah. Sticking your head in to eat, that is not enough. That is an embodied mitzvah. But that's the only other one I can think of. Most of our mitzvot use our bodies as a tool to do the mitzvah. We light the candles. We put on tefillin. We give tzedakah. But mikvah is an opportunity for us, even in our nakedness, to sanctify, to be holy, and to acknowledge that God envelops us in holiness, just as we are enveloped in water. This spring, we are taking the opportunity to close out our year in the adult education program that we've done this year. Our adult education theme has been back to the basics. And this spring, we have an opportunity to apply that theme to the life cycle, the Jewish life cycle. And one way that we are going to do that is by inviting the pluralistic mikvah, Mayim Chayim, in Boston, to do a 2-part session with our community about the laws of mikvah and its practical use in Jewish spirituality today. It's going to be a 2-part Thursday night program, the first 2 Thursday nights of May, so it's coming up. And I invite you to seriously think about the way in which mikvah can enhance your spiritual practice. And the second of the two-part program will in fact include a guided ritual hand washing, which has been used by the mikvah over the course of this year during COVID, when immersion in the mikvah wasn't possible at all times, a guided hand washing. So I want to close with what I began with, which is our tradition of washing hands before we eat bread is in fact an embodied tradition that reminds us of the importance of the sacred, that connects the ritual that we do of eating our Shabbat meals, of eating our meals, to the sacred service of God in the temple, to Agudat HaKodesh, to sacred service. It's my hope that we learn from this week's Torah portion, with all of its oozes and emissions and bloody parts, that we are able to learn the importance and the power of the holiness of our bodies. Shabbat Shalom. We continue now with the Musaf service, beginning with the Chatzi Kaddish, page 428. Eli Moses will lead us in Musaf. After Chatzi Kaddish, we will join together for the beginning of the Musaf service on page 430, and following the Kiddushah, we will continue with the individual whispered Amidah. We rise for Chatzi Kaddish, page 428.
Yitkara v'yitkara shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'amad yivrach kirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayekon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael. Bagala, bagala, u'v'zman kariv v'yimeru amin. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam le'olam yitbarach. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal shmei dekudashah v'yichlu le'ela min kol berchata b'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran me'olam v'yimeru Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Sarah Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor Hanora El Elyon Gomel Hasadim Tovim V'zocher hasei avot, u'mevigo elinei v'nehem, leman shemo v'yahava. Melech ozer v'kei demoshi u'magnei, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham v'vokei tzara. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai, mechayei timat harav le'hoshia. Mechalkel chayim bechesed, mechayei meitim berachamim ravim. Somech dovim verofei olim, umatir asurim, umechayei emunato, lishei me'afar, michavo chaval yurod, u'migdol melach, melech menid u'mechayeh, u'matzliach Yeshua. V'ne'eman atah l'chayot meitim, Baruch atah Adonai, mechayeh hametim. Kesotziach Sarfe Kodesh, Hamagdishim Shimacha Kodesh, Kakatuv al Yad Neviyacha, Vikar Azel Zeveyamar. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevot, Melech Haaretz, Kivodo. Kivodo Malei Olam, Mishar Tav Shalim Zelazeh, Aye Mikom Kivodo, Lumatam Baruch Yomeru. Baruch Kivodo Adonai Mikomo. Mikomo Yifein Barachamim, Ve'achon Am HaMachadim Shemo, Erev Bavoker B'chol Yom Tamid, Pamayim B'hava Shema Omrim. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu, Hu Moshienu, V'hu Yashmienu V'rachamav, Sheni Li'enei Kol Chai, V'hu Yashmienu V'rachamav, Sheni Li'enei Kol Chai. Liot Lachem Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohim. Uvedi Rei Kodecha Katuv Lemor,
Himlo Adonai Olam Eloi Tzion, Ledor Vador, Hallelujah.
Ledor Vador Nagid Yod Lecha, Ulenetzach Nitzachim Kedushatcha Nakdish, V'shikharcha Eloheinu Mipinu Le'am Mishlei Olam Va'ed, Kiel Melech Gadol V'kadosh Ata. Baruch Atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh. If you haven't completed your individual whispered Amidah, please continue davening. We join together for Kaddish Shalem, page 506. Yitkadal v'yitkadal Shemir Rabba.
Amen.
Ve'amad yivrach kirotei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayachon v'mechon v'chay dechol be'Yisrael ba'agalav v'zman kari v'yimeru.
Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevarach. Vayalam lal me'al maya Yitbarach.
Yisbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yishmam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitwal shmei kudusha.
Brichum.
Leila min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran ve'alma v'imeru.
Amen.
Titkabal tzotachon v'mechon dechol Yisrael kadama v'honi v'shmaya v'imeru.
Amen.
Shalom rabba min shemayim chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imeru.
Amen.
Yoseh shalom imramav v'yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imeru.
Amen. A Yasher Koach to Eli for leading us in Musaf, and a Yasher Koach also to Steve for leading us in Shacharit, to Howie Middleman for chanting the Haftarah, and to Dan and Eli for chanting the Torah. Of course, Yasher Koach also to everybody who joined with us to make our minyan and to have an aliyah and to be present in person this morning, and a welcome to everybody who joined us and participated by live stream. The congregation celebrates this week the birthdays of Bruce Bramley, Ethan Kaufman, Kara Ellenbogen, Kati Iluz, Nathan Weiss, Barbara Hollander, Wilbur Shapiro, Mary Gross, Aaron Gruenberg, and Melvin Wigler. A special happy birthday to Nathan Weiss, who is turning 99 this Monday, and to Wilbur Shapiro, who is turning 91, and to Melvin Wigler, who is celebrating this coming week his 80th birthday. Mazel tov to everybody who is celebrating a birthday this week. We have no anniversaries to announce in our community this week, but I did want to announce a mazel tov to Zachary Podick, child of Leon and Karen Podick, who celebrated last Shabbat. They are becoming a B mitzvah and celebrating that with a wonderful celebration. That was last week. So mazel tov, and mazel tov to everybody who is celebrating their birthday this week. Before Aleinu, I invite you to turn back to page 239. As we count Omer, we rise for the counting of the Omer. Yesterday at Shacharit, we counted the 19th day. Last night, we said the blessing and counted the next one, which is the one we're going to count right now. If you haven't said the bracha yet for today, you can say the bracha quickly right now. We join together page 239, the very top of the page, line 20. Hayom esrim yom shehem shnei shavuot v'shisha yamim la'omer. Today is 20 days, which is 2 weeks and 6 days in the counting of the Omer. We turn back to page 510 for Aleinu, page 510.
Aleinu
L'shabeach ladon hakol, l'tekedu la'yotzeh reshit, shalom asanu l'koyei haratzot, v'lo samanu k'mizbechot ha'adama, shalom samchokinu kahem, v'gor aleinu k'chol ha'onam, v'anachnu korim, u'mishachavim u'modim, Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shehu notei shamayim v'yosed haaretz, U'moshav yikaro b'shamayim imam, U'shchinatu zo, Begovhei meromim, Hu Eloheinu einon, Ememokenu, Hevezulato, Kakatu, Vetorato, Miadatayom, V'hashivota, Elevavecha, Ki Adonai, Hu Elohim, Vashamayim imam, V'al haaretz, Mitachat einot.
Kakatu b'Torah techa Adonai imlach le'olam va'ed.
V'ne'emar Haya Adonai le'melech al kol haaretz v'yom hahu yeh Adonai echad hu shemo echad. The congregation honors the memories of the following individuals who have gone to their eternal rest: Joseph Cohen, Morris Goldstein, Theodore Kiesel, Martha King, Herman Passler, Karen Weiner, Ruth Appel, Benjamin Brilliant, Howard Goldner, Mark Moses, Martin Shapiro, Ronald Silver, Rochella Schock, Julius Westheimer, Irving Greenberg, George Weil, Edwin Brown, and Sarah Stein. We also learned with sorrow of the passing of Norman Goldstein, father of our member Seth Goldstein and father-in-law of Lori Goldstein. Our condolences to the Goldstein family, and we learned of the passing of Sandra Feuerstein, the sister of Alice Rudnick. Also this past week, our deep condolences to the Feuerstein and Rudnick families. In solemn testimony to the unbroken chain of faith which links the generations of the house of Israel one to the next, those who mourn and those who are observing Yartzeit now rise to magnify and sanctify God's name with the words of Kaddish Avelim, Mourner's Kaddish, page 512. Yitz Gadal, V'yitz Kadash, Shemei Rabbah,
Amen.
Ve'alma Divra Kirutei, Ve'amlich Malchutei, V'chayichon, Uvyomechon, Uvchaye, Dechol Beit Yisrael, V'agala, Uvizman Kariv, V'imru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'alam Lamei Almayah. Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'or V'yitromam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shmei D'Kudisha B'richu Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechamata Damiran Be'alma V'imru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabbah Min Shemaya V'chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Aseh Shalom Imramav, Huya Aseh Shalom, Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Jackie's going to offer some announcements on behalf of the congregation.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
On Thursday, the Musar class continues with week 4, and that's decisiveness. And that's at 1 p.m. on Thursdays. And Sunday the 25th is an Interfaith Earth Day, Mitzvah Day, with the Schenectady Community Ministries, formerly SICM, and the Clergy Against Hate. And that's a cleanup at Vale Cemetery at 1 p.m. And they're asking that you bring your work gloves, your yard tools, and your masks. That's going to be a good event. For
Everybody should come.
Yep, definitely.
Our congregation sponsored an apple tree, which we're going to plant.
So come. It's going to be a beautiful day, hopefully. And then that evening, Sunday the 25th, is our Sarah Hurwitz book discussion, and that was our Library of Gratitude book that everyone in the congregation got and hopefully have read. It's going to be a great evening, so please catch up on your reading if you haven't yet, so you can participate. And then on Thursday the 29th at 4:30 p.m. is a family Lag BaOmer camping celebration. We're parking lot camping, and that's going to be a really fun afternoon event, and more information on that will be coming out. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Just one final note, which is next week we have the triple B'nai Mitzvah of Lily, Ryan, and Josh Harrow. And because of that, just make sure that if you're planning to come to services in person next week, that you call Josh to RSVP so that we make sure that there's space for you and let you know also if there isn't space for you. We want to make sure that we are in compliance with the guidelines of the reopening committee, and to make sure that our B'nai Mitzvah family is able to invite as many guests as they can to celebrate with them. So please make sure, don't assume that there isn't room for you, but do make sure to call the office to arrange a spot. And I'm really excited. They're all prepared and ready, and they're going to teach. Each one of them is going to teach. It's going to be really, really terrific. I'm very excited to celebrate their Simcha with the community. We close with Adon Olam, page 514.
Adon Olam Asher Malach
B'terem kol Yisir Nivra Li'et Nasa B'chefso Kol Azai Melech Shemoni Ka'adei Hacharei Kiflot HaKol Levado Yimlo Nohora Vehu Haya Vehu Hoveh Vehu Yihye B'tifara Vehu Echad
Ve'sheni
Lehamshilo Lehachira Veli Reshit Veli Tachlit Velo Haoz Vehamisa Vehu Heli Vechai Goavi Betzor Chadli B'Yesara Vehu Nisi Humanosli Menat Kosi B'Yomecha Biado Afki Ruchi Li'etishan He'aira Ve'im Ruchi Geviati Adonai li Elohira. Yashikach.
Yashikar.
Oh, great. Ah, well, that's terrific.